Well, things might have got a little out of hand around here. It's nice to have the Scout back again, though. Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're back on the Scout. I went ahead and pushed this thing back down by the shop. As you guys recall, last time we towed it up the driveway with the service binder. But this week, my fuel pump rebuild kit finally came in. The folks I ordered this from said that they were having quality issues with these kits. That's what took so long for this thing. And I'm totally willing to wait for a good quality kit. I don't want to have to be rebuilding this fuel pump every couple of years, so looks like every single gasket that I'll ever need in the history of ever is in here. I don't even know where half these gaskets go, so that's good. I'm going to go ahead and pop the fuel pump off this engine. We'll take it on in the shop and we'll go through it. Alrighty, and here we have it. This here is an old Carter fuel pump. These were only used on the slant 4 engines in the Scouts, really. And of course, this up here is your vacuum setup for your vacuum wipers. So you have this hose, and then your vacuum wipers are actually hooked up here. Of course, if you want to pull this off, you just undo your inlet fuel line and your outlet fuel line, these two bolts, and your vacuum lines, and you'll have this thing off. So I'm going to go ahead and get started by taking off my fuel filter and sediment bowl here, this fuel line, this vacuum line, and then we're going to start diving into the upper and lower portions. Well, what you're not going to want to do is that. Fortunately, the service binder still has a fuel pump on it, and it's not utilized currently, so I grabbed the sediment bowl off that. Obviously, I need to clean it, and I have no idea how engine oil was getting into the fuel pump. So that's a curiosity for that truck that I can deal with later, but luckily I did have another sediment bowl. And yeah, but that's out of the way now. So next thing I'm going to do is start down here on the bottom with the fuel pump portion. It looks like we have one big diaphragm in there, and then a couple other odds and ends. Of course, I got to find a home for, well, I'd say at least 65% of all the little odds and ends we have in here. So yeah. Alrighty. Went ahead and took off these 6 screws. There's the 6th one. We got the bottom off the fuel pump. Looks like we have one of these little valves in here. These 2 flathead screws look like they hold these 2 halves of this bottommost portion together. And then here, I assume this guy should pop out somehow. And that's the big main diaphragm. That guy that pumps all the fuel. And this one looks to be pretty old and ragged, so I would say that's where we were getting fuel into the oil. Of course, when this gets cracked, all it has to do is go up there, and then all your fuel goes right into the oil. That was the issue with the Scout, and that's why I haven't let it run for the past, well, shoot, it hasn't run since like December, I think. But yeah, you can see the dry rotting and cracking there on this diaphragm. So I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to clean this guy up completely, take these screws out and replace, looks like there's a rubber gasket in here between where the filter goes and where the big diaphragm is. So yeah. Alrighty, I got these 2 screws out. This one was stubborn as all get out, and I had to use the impact driver to knock it out, which kind of scared me because, well, I only have one of these fuel pumps, so I can't break much more than, you know, what I've already broken. Which apparently that's going to be a pain in the butt to find, because this one off the service truck won't even work, because the lip is different and it needs to set in this base. So that's cool. But anyhow, those are out. So this guy should separate now, like that. Very nice. And then we have that rubber gasket, and then some way I need to find to replace these 2 valves. Those look like check valves to allow the fuel to only flow one way. Maybe it's one of those check valves that goes bad in conjunction with the diaphragm that causes it to fill the oil with gas. I don't know. But yeah, I'll see if I can't figure out how to get these guys out and replaced. And then, of course, this gasket. and that sealing surface needs to get cleaned up. And then that looks like all of the odds and ends. Of course, everything needs to get cleaned, but that looks like everything that needs to go in this bottom portion. So yeah. Well, I decided while I was diving into everything, I'd go ahead and pop the top off this thing and have a look at the top portion. So we had this spring in here, and then this cap that puts tension on that spring. We have 2 check valves for vacuum. That screw there, this gasket, and it looks like that screw holds in this big diaphragm, or bolt rather. And I'm going to go ahead and pop that off and see if I can't get this big diaphragm off. And I'm going to line everything out and make sure everything actually matches before I get too in depth with stuff. Alrighty, well, I was going to pull this screw off, but I grabbed it with my Knipex here. And that guy pops right out. You can see we have the camera will focus. You'll see that we have a rubber gasket there. That looks to be this guy. And then 2 more check valves. So I've got, looks like 2 in the bottom portion, 2 in this upper vacuum portion, and 2 right there. So I'll need to figure out how to get these guys out and replace them. And then I just need to figure out how in the world I get this diaphragm out of there. Alrighty, well, I found that the big rubber diaphragm there is connected to the arm, and you can see it moves up and down. So I think I need to pop the pin out of here. So I went ahead and pulled this guy. You can see the kit already comes with a replacement one of those. And then I do believe this pin is the pin that holds this rod in place. So I'm going to knock this pin out, if it'll come out, and then pull this rod out of here. See, we have a spring down there too. And then this diaphragm. Alrighty, with the use of a tiny little punch here, I drove this pin out to here. You can see this rod popped out. There's a little spring that's right there. That spring rubs up against the case. It goes on that little nub there, and that's part of what keeps the spring action going on this arm. And then once this guy popped out, I felt this thing kind of come up, so I think it'll pull right out. There we have it. This thing's all covered in oil, it seems like. That would make sense because that is the oil side of this pump. And yeah, if I line this one up with the new one, they do look pretty similar. I think the holes are slightly misplaced on the new one. They're close, but not quite, so I might have to knock new holes in. But this does look very, very similar, and it will definitely work. It's obviously nice new rubber. This old one is pretty worn out. Looks like there's no tension on that spring anymore. So yeah, I think the arm here grabs onto this taper in here, and then it holds this diaphragm in place. So anyways, I'm going to take some time. I'm going to clean everything up here, and then we'll get her ready for disassembly. Or reassembly. That was disassembly. Duh. So yeah. Alrighty. So we have these little check valves everywhere. That look like this guy. And, well, I figured out how to get them out. I took a little punch. Same guy I used to drive out the pin that held in the arm here. I just set it right there, and these guys knock right out. You can see we got new little rubber gaskets for these check valves. Of course, this old rubber is probably brittle. This one actually looks really nice. But yeah, you can go ahead and replace these rubbers, and then I just got to figure out where all these check valves go. Of course, one of the important things is to note which way each check valve goes, because like up here in the vacuum, we have one of these will take air out but not let it in, and one will take air in but not let it out. So if you get all your check valves backwards, then like, well, things aren't going to work. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of meticulously make sure I get things, you know, assembled right and done right, and try and find a home for all these little... We've got 4 of these check valves, and I've got 3 setups to do just the rubber gasket. So I'm going to try and find homes for all these things. Alrighty, so I went ahead and started putting this thing back together. You can see I got the slower half screwed back together. I got my new check valve rubber in there, and I installed the new springs as well. These are the old ones here. You can see the new ones are more of a cone shape. So this bottom part's back together. Next thing I'm going to do, I'll replace this rubber O-ring on this disc for the vacuum portion, and then I'll be ready to install this new diaphragm and this arm again. You can see I've got a new pin that holds this rod in place. I got to make sure this spring in here gets back into its location. So it's going to be kind of a circus act to get all that together. I am not going to mess with these check valves up here or in here because that seems like a lot of monkeying around. I have no idea how in the world to even get these guys out, let alone these guys. I think I could knock them out from the top, but I'm not going to worry about it. I'll probably mess more up trying to get those out than I will just leaving it alone. So yeah, this thing's ready to go back together. Like I just said, I'm going to start replacing all these gaskets and whatnot. Alrighty, so we got the main body all back together here. Put the new pin in there, slid right in, no problem, and then I had to get the spring positioned underneath this rod. Yeah, it's all together, right? When you put this new diaphragm in, you have to like push it down and slide the push rod here into it. It goes, when you push it down, of course you're compressing the spring, and then that push rod goes right there at the top, kind of pinches it, and then this guy, which is your vacuum disc, I'm going to call it that, when it slides in the top, this rod actually goes on top. It goes on top of the diaphragm in there, so when your camshaft is pushing this diaphragm up and down, it's also moving this disc up and down to run your vacuum. I was going to replace this push rod. You can see a new one came in the kit, but the new one's actually smaller, and it came with this seal as well, but this seal has no place in this vacuum pump. So I'm assuming this kit is for a slightly different fuel pump. I'm not sure if there's some difference in the years or something, or if this pump itself is different, but we'll just leave it as is with this one. It's a little worn down on the top, but I think it'll survive. I'm going to go ahead and splotch some oil on this guy so that it makes a good seal in here and everything rides nice. I assume it is oiled by oil vapors traveling through this fuel pump when the engine's running, but I have no proof of that, so I'm just going to slap some oil in it. Can't hurt anything. It's certainly not going to hurt the vacuum wipers or the engine, so yeah. And then I'll be ready to, well, I got to punch new holes in this diaphragm, slightly different positions because this is just the littlest bit off, and then I'll be ready to actually screw the bottom back on and the top back on. Alrighty, and here's where we've ended up, and this is probably where we're going to end for the week. This was everything I needed to do to rebuild my fuel pump with this fuel pump rebuild kit. Of course, I have leftover parts. I didn't want to pop any of the little check valves out, and I really didn't want to wreck anything. I got super lazy, didn't clean off all the grease and oil and everything, and unfortunately I cannot put it back on the Scout because this fuel bowl is wrong. This one came off of the service truck right there, so that's unfortunate. We'll probably just put this back on the service truck. There's the wire bail for it. Of course, I had to go ahead and just drop mine because, you know, why not break the one and only glass part on this whole fuel bowl. You can see the original fuel bowl actually slides in there, and this one doesn't have the lip to slide down in there. So that's a huge shame. But yeah, this fuel pump should be ready to go as soon as I have another fuel bowl to put on it. I did find that when assembling this, in order to get this lower portion on, I had to have this top off. Of course, that giant spring is up in here, and that just pushes down on the fuel diaphragm there. It makes everything all kind of wonky, so if you pull this off, it takes all that tension, and this guy goes right together. I thought that the screw holes were in the wrong position. They're perfectly fine, actually. Once you get this thing put together, of course, the fuel diaphragm isn't flat. It's not just a flat piece of rubber. So when you go to put this together, it sort of pushes those screw holes and actually makes them closer together when you go to put it together. So yeah, worked out mint. That thing should be good to go just as soon as I have a fuel bowl. So yeah, I might be able to track one down, I might not. So well, if the video ends here, thanks for watching. I'm glad you guys did. I hope you learned something. I definitely did. It was nice to rebuild this thing, breathe new life into it. That way I can keep my vacuum wipers and, you know, originality and whatnot, and breathing life into old stuff. I'm definitely glad somebody's still making the rebuild kit for these things. That was, you know, not something that a lot of folks do. A lot of companies just, well, everybody just swaps over to electric on these Scouts, and I wanted to keep the original mechanical pump on it. So, yeah, good stuff.
That's funny.
Alrighty, well, I was ready to call it a day because, well, I had to find a new sediment bowl, but, well, my mom actually had some shot glasses, and they fit. So, awesome. Let's get this thing thrown on the Scout and see if it actually works. Alrighty, I got my fuel pump all hooked back up and I changed on the oil. Of course, diaphragm went bad in the fuel pump and filled the engine full of gas. That thins out your oil and also takes away a lot of its lubricity properties, so that oil's no good, even though it probably only had like 3 hours on it. But, way of the road. So, we're ready to see if this thing will start now. So we're going to take the air cleaner off and I'll fill up the carburetor, and hopefully that battery still is good. I don't know, maybe not. If it's not good, we'll just find another one. So just give this thing some gas and see if it'll zing over here. Well, that works. Probably gonna have to do this a time or two till it gets gas in it, so. Not quick enough. Well, you get the idea. Alrighty, well, it's time for me to admit to things that I don't want to admit to, but kind of have to. So I monkeyed with this thing for a little while. Like I said, I figured I was going to have to prime the carb and run the engine a little bit for this thing to pick up fuel. And I did that again and again. I took off the inlet line and made sure that fuel was getting there. There wasn't any blockage. I put a couple of gallons in the tank to make sure it had plenty of head pressure to push the fuel up. And I took off the line to the carburetor. None of it was working. I also checked for suction on the inlet line. Nothing. It wasn't blowing out of the outlet. So I took the fuel pump off, took it inside, and had a look at it. And it turns out in the base of the pump, there is this gasket here. It looks like a smiley face. I put that in backwards. So that gasket, instead of allowing fuel to go in up to the diaphragm, wasn't letting fuel up. So there was no way this fuel pump was ever going to work. But I found the issue, I fixed it, and I just tested it. Boom, fuel right to the pump. So I'm going to finish hooking all this nonsense up, and then I think we'll actually be in business here. Well, I've already got her up here carving up all this snow we've got. This is just what's been plowed. Of course, we still have, like, you know, all of the snow everywhere. But, yeah, fuel pump's working great. Turns out, once I got her running again, the needle and seat on the carburetor didn't want to needle and seat anymore, so it was dumping gas all over the intake and actually dumping gas down the carburetor. And that might be part of the contribution to what was putting gas into the oil, actually. But either way, I didn't like that it was, you know, filling the oil with gas. It's bad for the engine, and, well, it's just not great. So, yeah, I'm glad to have the fuel pump rebuilt. Kind of a surprise that that shot glass actually worked. There you can see the shot glass in there doing its thing. Like I said, I can't get a filter in the shot glass, but, well, she'll run unfiltered for a little while until I can find an actual sediment bowl for this thing. Absolutely hilarious that a shot glass will work, though. So, yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Sorry I can't get any real driving footage because, well, my cameras are elsewhere. But, yeah, great to have the Scout back. We could try and go up here by the Kenworth. Or not. Oh yeah. Of course, these bias plies, they just spin once you get into the snow. Oh, it's a little deep there.